Hey everyone, welcome to the Powered by Iron Health podcast. We are here with Dr. John.
What up?
How do you say your last name? Ribeiro?
Don't you dare. Ribeiro.
Ribeiro. All right, before we dive into it, remember we're just going to highlight what the purpose of this podcast is, right? We want to create a community that raises the standard of health and wellness. So that's a big part of our vision at Iron Health, Powered by Iron Health podcast. We're going to be bringing on different guests. Today, we're going to be talking a lot about stretching and learning a little bit about John. We are in the Stamford location. How's it feel?
It's great, man.
Yeah.
This is a new hood.
Yeah.
It's awesome, man.
It's like 5 minutes from your house, which is nice.
Less than a mile.
Can you walk here? That's the
I could swim.
Wow.
If I traversed across the channel, I could bring a kayak.
If you do it in the summer, let's get a video.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Has it been so far? I think that we can tell people. Let's tell people about Stamford. Like, we're here. Let's
It's great.
let the world know.
It's sweet. I mean, the location's perfect. If you want to get a beef Wellington or a lobster mac and cheese after or before your PT, we're right above Prime. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It couldn't be better, man. The location's huge. A ton of young professionals here. A ton of finance people here. A lot of active individuals. You always see people running. Tons of dogs around. Like, what's not to love?
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah. What if you don't like dogs?
Then honestly, you're not welcome. I'm sure there's plenty of PT places you could go to. It's not here.
Cat people are allowed, though. I hope.
Cat people are allowed.
Okay.
Animal people are allowed. Lizards, tarantula, snake, whatever.
Yeah. Whatever. We're welcome to all, right?
We don't discriminate here.
Tell me about you, man. What got you into PT? Let's start there.
Yeah. So I would say initially for PT, going just to undergrad, I had no idea what I wanted to do after high school. It's like, all right, I like science, went from there. So I went into Northeastern as a bio major, and I was just like, kind of just winging it, like most of us do. As a teenager, it's like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what sort of career I actually wanted or long-term goals. So from there, basically just kind of, did some part-time jobs, did some co-ops at Northeastern. So it's basically like an internship. In some labs, kind of more of that traditional bio setting. I was like, not really for me. It was kind of isolating, kind of boring. And then I started a job at CrossFit Southie as a coach there.
Okay.
And then once that happened, I was like, holy crap, this is sweet. This is a lot of fun. You get to work with a lot of cool people. You get to actually make some changes in their life day to day, and you get to know them. Like, the relationship building was huge because every coach is knowing every one of those athletes, how they move, even just little things about their day. It's huge. It's kind of fulfilling to actually have that sort of personal one-on-one relationship with, hundreds of people. It's like, okay, how can I actually do this, for a permanent career? Coaching long-term, not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just, financially it's not necessarily the best setup unless you really get in with a good squad and you have a, decent-sized company. So I was like, all right, maybe I can just do PT instead. That was around the time that a lot of these kind of like CrossFit, mobility coaches that were also PTs were kind of like Kelly Starrett and some of those guys. He kind of like, was like a huge mentor / like hero to me at the time. I was like, holy shit, like this guy's doing exactly what I want to do.
Yeah.
Can I basically, not necessarily copy it, but it's like, I want to basically just do that. Just kind of spiraled from there. And then I started realizing, okay, PT is definitely for me. And then just took some prereqs at the end of my undergrad and then went to PT school and that was it, man.
Nice. So you were bio major in undergrad?
Yeah. So it was like, do I want to work in the lab? Do I want to do med school? Do I want to do PT? Or who knows? A totally different direction. So I just went in, thinking I like science, and that was it.
It's interesting. I always like hearing different stories of how people get into it because everyone's different, right? Everyone has a different journey. For you, being in the CrossFit gym was really a facilitator to say I could do PT. Like Kelly Starrett was really like a big guy for you.
Yeah, like dude, like this is fun. You get to make because it elevates it a little bit. I've learned a ton from fantastic coaches, and having that background with PT and that degree, I think, lends itself to slightly more credibility. Because some of these coaches are some of the smartest and best and brightest people that you would meet, and they know a ton of stuff about the body and the athletes and kind of how people should be moving and how to load and get the results that they want.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't really exist that much even in the PT world. So kind of blending the two together, I was like, holy shit, you can kind of take the best of everything and really like transform not only, the results for your actual athletes, but like the field itself. And I was like, okay, this is exactly what I want to do. And just took off from there.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm on board with that. Transferring the field is like, we got to change it, man. It's such a bad rap for it, right?
It's been weird for, we're starting to see the changes now, but especially like more of the older school mentality of like, if they're finishing their plan of care, like, no, they just need to go to a personal trainer. It's like, dude, PTs are that. Like, you don't need to necessarily send them off to a trainer. Now, that's a totally viable option, but it's like, we need to change the conversation and think of it more about like a lifelong sort of pursuit of wellness, as opposed to just like, okay, now your hip doesn't hurt. See you later.
Yeah.
You're good. You can get out of the office. It's like, well, what more can we do? We're setting the bar back then a lot lower than it needed to be. And it's like, dude, we need to aim a lot higher and actually see what people are capable of. And once you start making those changes, it's like, holy shit, you can unlock a lot of potential. And really what it is for your patients is the freedom to do what they want to do, as opposed to just settling for like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. That's just the way it is. Like, screw that. Like, that's not the way it is. Like, make a change. Like, let's figure it out. Let's do it together. And we can do a lot more as healthcare providers, I think, than what, that older school mentality was. The scope was a lot smaller.
Yeah, a lot more empowerment based. That's what that sounds like.
100%.
For you, did you ever go to PT as a kid?
Yeah, a ton.
Okay.
I moved like shit.
All right, so tell me an experience.
Dude, it was.
You still don't move that well, though.
I moved like dog shit.
No.
Do as I say, not as I say.
John could do a full split, actually. We'll show it at the end of the video.
We'll see. That's behind the paywall.
But let's go back to an experience of you had in PT that you were like, wow, this is something, because it had to be on your radar, right? To even know what it was.
100%.
So let's hear an experience.
Yeah, I mean, I played sports all the way up until college. Mostly for me, soccer, which didn't seem, based on how I look, I was definitely one of the larger kids there. I used to always ask my mom, like, why do my jeans say husky? Big bones, sweetie. So I was always, a larger kid. But yeah, it was kind of like with that. It's like my muscles and bones were always growing at different times. Kind of like everyone. Like, you get those traditional growing pains. I had, plenty of Achilles tendon problems, hamstring problems, hip problems, all the time. It was because the season for that level of soccer didn't really end. I was playing all year round. So I would be playing Premier League during, the spring when the school wasn't actually playing, as opposed to like in the fall, you do high school and you kind of like, you're always playing at some point. In the winter, it was always indoor leagues, or we would just travel down south and play there. So it was just constant. Mm-hmm. And back then too, there was no like true strength and condition. Like it wasn't as accurate and as well thought out as it is now. Like, if you want to get in better shape, okay, just run more. That was it. It wasn't like, oh, if you have an injury, like, okay, let's look how you're moving. Let's start loading and dosing properly. Let's look at your nutrition. How are you sleeping? What's your warm-up routine? Things like that. It was like, I don't know, just take some Advil. You should be good. Or let's just tape the hell out of your knee or your calf or your ankle. It was much more of just like a blunt approach. Just like, yeah, if this doesn't work, I don't know, man, can't help you. And it was more just like a trial by fire. The kids that lasted just got lucky, man. Like, they just didn't get hurt. And I was not one of those kids. I was hurt all the time.
Yeah.
Probably in and out of PT every year, probably for like 5 to 10.
Oh, wow.
It was a lot.
What did you like about it back then?
Yeah, I mean, to tell you the truth, man, I didn't like it that much, man, because back then too, it was like, all right, just throw you on ice and stim or a hot pack, maybe do a few sets of, let's say, calf raises for the Achilles, maybe hop on a slant board for some stretching, that's it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't really see my PT a lot. It was just kind of like, they'd load me up. All right, see you in 20 minutes. And that was it. And there was never any coaching on like, how do I change, the lifestyle? Like, what sort of activity modification should I do? What is the end goal? Like, plugging it into an archetype to make the patients more informed, that didn't exist. So even at the time, I was like, yeah, it's all right. Some of the PTs are really cool. But I never, at first, I wasn't like, wow, this is definitely something I want to do.
Yeah.
Not until I actually saw what it could be, I was like, holy shit, this could be a lot more than it is. Like, the bar could be set 1,000 times higher.
What do you think it is transitioning to? Like, with PTs being doctors and having DPTs, like, we can really facilitate what's the future in your eyes of what PT is.
Honestly, I see it as the PT is the new primary care provider for anything orthopedic. Now, I mean, there's still neuro too. But for the most part, I would love to see, even if you added another year, if that's what it takes in terms of PT school to get more credibility, to actually be taken more seriously, I think that would help. And truthfully, like, patients don't need to keep being pinballed around to every provider under the sun before they actually get the care that they need. What it really needs to be is direct to consumer, like any other good. And it's like, no, like, just go see your PT. They can diagnose the problem, they can treat you right there. Like, why do we need to waste more money and time? Okay, then you have to go to your PCP, who's going to send you to an ortho, who might send you to one more specialist, and then finally you're going to have to wait to get a script to go see your PT. So you've essentially took one step and turned it into four, and now people are, unsure of what they're supposed to do, and like they get 8 different messages from 1,000 different providers, and some people are telling them, okay, never squat again if my knee hurts, or someone's saying, okay, you have to do this or that. It's like, I think the future should be PTs taken a lot more seriously, and they are the one-stop shop for anything orthopedic, at least in terms of the first line of defense. I'm not against surgery, nothing like that, but I think if we change the role more to that primary care provider as like, okay, the first person who's going to triage the injury, I think that could be huge. So you don't have to waste time. The patients like it better, the providers like it better, and it doesn't mean that these other professions are useless, because they're fantastic. Orthos are great. Primary care providers, in terms of the physicians, are fantastic. But I think changing that first line of defense would be huge. I would love to see more responsibility for the PT.
How do you think we get that though? Like, adding a year to school would be a hard sell, first of all.
Yep, 100%.
And how would we get more credibility in that world?
It's up to the individual. It has to be PTs taking themselves more seriously and actually, as weird as it sounds, giving a shit. Not that they don't. There's a lot of fantastic PTs, but like any profession, there are some people who coast and there's some people who don't. Mm-hmm. If we want to be taken seriously, you have to act serious, and you have to actually get the results that you're promising and make it, above and beyond what you're actually, expected to do, delivering more results than people thought possible. And once you start doing that, the credibility will follow.
So it has to come from internal.
100%.
Yeah.
Like everything.
Which is, it's a part of like our vision statement too, is aligned with that. So,
Right. You just got to do it, man. Like, it's the simplest thing. And it's like you said, like the year of school, that probably not going to happen. Who the hell wants to do that?
It might happen, but for other reasons,
Exactly. For other reasons.
Yeah.
And that stuff is all politics for the most part. But, there have been some fantastic PTs that I know that have, discovered things that maybe someone else in the healthcare field have missed. So as like that first line of defense, kind of like, even what they do in the military, PTs are considered more like a PCP.
Yeah.
And I think that transition, because the proof of concept, it works. And I think it would be huge. It would make a big difference. But that means that PTs need to start taking themselves more seriously and not sell themselves short too. Like, I always joke around like, it's like Kirkland brand doctor. It's like, no, this is real. This is like, all jokes aside, like, we're actually doctors and we should be taken seriously, and you need to act like it too. And the PTs need to act like it as well.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. It's so true.
Yeah.
It needs to come from within.
Yeah, man. It's just one of those things. I'm like, you just got to nut up or shut up.
Well, it's very, very well said. Then. So when you were coming up through the world in PT, where'd you go to PT school?
I went to University of Hartford. So I did my undergrad at Northeastern, where I met my wife, and then she's from this.
She changed his life.
That's it. That's it. So yeah, she's from Westchester. So I was like, all right, might as well start moving this way. And then University of Hartford was kind of like a good halfway point between my family in Boston and then hers in Westchester. So it's only about 90 minutes either direction. So it's
Gotcha.
kind of a good middle point. And then from there, finished up and then moved over here.
What did you like about the university? What were the good top things that you learned?
Honestly, it was nice because it was like smaller.
Okay.
It wasn't a giant program. So it was like you got to actually know your professors a lot more, which was good. You could actually develop those relationships. Because, it's not necessarily a tiny class. It was around 40 people or so, give or take. Some people dropped out. But you really just get to know people a lot more. It's a much more intimate setting, which is good.
Yeah.
You can kind of pick people's brains a little bit more and develop those relationships. That translates into, as well, like doing that with your patients. You got to learn how to talk to people. And that's the most important thing, I would say, in PT.
Yeah, it's a service business.
With people.
Yep.
That's, anyone can learn different techniques, but, actually the human element of it is very challenging. And that's the most important thing, I would say.
For sure. For anyone who wants to be a PT or has aspirations, what would be your advice to them, since we're on that topic?
Yeah, truthfully too, I would think very strongly if that's 100% what you want to do, because it's an extremely rewarding profession. But it's not something like anything in life that you can half-ass. It's like if you want to be really good at it, you have to take it seriously, and you have to make sure that, number one, your communication's on point and you're doing it for the right reason. You're not doing it for the money or anything like that. You're doing it to actually help people, because that's when you get the good results, and that's how you can change people's lives. Is if you want to help people every single day and actually develop a one-on-one relationship with them and know intimate details about their life and what they're doing on vacation, how their kids are doing, because that's what you're doing, and you're there for 45 minutes to an hour to 90 minutes, depending on the session length. Like you're going to talk about stuff, and you're going to need to know basically everything about them, because that's when you get the good details, and that's when you can really make some good changes, or things that you might not have picked up before. That's the secret sauce. So if that's something that interests you, 100% go for it. But if someone's just in it for money or what other reason, might not be for you, truthfully.
Yeah, no, that's well said. I mean, I agree with that completely as well. And we are in the business of changing lives, right? That's the reality of it.
That's it.
So on that note, let's go into some stretching. This is going to be the bulk of our talk here. We want to educate people on the mechanics of stretching, why it works, why it doesn't.
Yep.
So to you, how do you define stretching? Yeah.
Defining the term stretching, I mean, simply just a change in length or attempting to change length.
Okay.
But the attempt is everything too, and that's where we get into the gory details of it, because there's so many people now that don't understand why they're not getting flexible. And I was one of those people too. It's like you're bashing your head against the wall doing passive stretching. It doesn't mean it's wrong. There's definitely a place for it, whether you just want to.
Can we define passive stretching for people who don't know what that is?
I would say no active contraction of the muscle. You think of it like you throw your leg up on a table and you do a little hamstring stretch. You lean forward, you feel the stretch, and you just chill. Nothing else. There's no increase in nervous system involvement. You're not squeezing. You're not being dynamic and adding movement. It's the simplest form is throw your leg up or whatever it is you're stretching. Feel the stretch. Don't move. That's it. Just chill and then just kind of hang out there and hope that the length increases. But if you're actually trying to make real change, that approach does not work for the most part.
Okay.
If someone is terribly inflexible and they've never stretched anything, sure. Kind of like when someone's new to working out. I mean, listen, when you put a bar in their hands and do anything, even like, let's say if they're a teenager, never lifted, touched a weight in their life, you do anything, it's going to work. Their body is so unused to that stimulus, they're going to respond pretty much instantly. And in scenarios like that, that's when you start to see, they call it like the noob gains, because you'll get strong doing anything, man.
Yeah.
And you can lose fat at the same time, and you can build muscle at the same time. One of the rare cases that you could maybe get both at the same time is during that period. And the same with stretching. If someone is totally inflexible, sure, maybe some passive stretching if that's the first time they've ever done it. There's definitely a place. And if you want to introduce them slowly, I'm 100% for it. I would say do that as opposed to heavily loading things at first.
Okay, so let's start with passive stretching, or let's start with that newbie level.
Noob gains.
The noob gains, yeah. The noob gains of mobility or stretching.
Yeah.
If I'm a newbie and I want to start getting a stretching regimen,
sure.
And you're going to say, hey, maybe passive stretching can work for you.
Yeah, I mean,
Would that be what you would jump to right away?
Probably not.
Okay.
Truthfully.
Why?
There's more bang for your buck. I would say, like I said, the passive stretching could work if someone just wants to dip into some of those positions and they don't want to be lazy about it, and it feels subjectively good for them. It feels good when I do a little hamstring stretch, but I'm not trying to get any more flexible. Fine. Totally reasonable to do. But in terms of if I actually want to make real changes, what I'm going to start doing is thinking about what position this person wants to be in, what position that joint needs to be in, so some of those joint angles, how that tissue needs to be loaded, and I'm going to do exactly that. I'm just going to load it. Gently and gradually at first, and then over time we increase that load even more.
Okay. So can we start with an example? Let's use the hamstring, because the hamstring's the easiest one. Everyone knows you lift your leg up, stretch,
100%.
passive
so
stretch.
If someone needs more hamstring flexibility. Okay, so basically in a long lever position, so with their knee totally straight, they want more hip flexion. So they're basically getting that leg all the way up there. What I would probably do at first is put them in that position under load. So let's think of an exercise that would actually load those hamstrings in that stiff-legged or relatively stiff-legged position, like a Romanian deadlift. What I could do is have them stand, and essentially, you don't even need weight at first, start loading that position just with their own body weight, with the weight of their own trunk, and then go all the way down as far as they can while maintaining a decent, back position, and then just come back up and start loading those hamstrings and getting them used to that big stretch and lengthening, and then contract and get out of that stretch. So you get that big eccentric loading, and then you get that concentric loading afterward. So once you start loading into that position, you're starting to see that adaptation of that muscle and the nervous system getting used to that new resting length. So then you'll see those gains start to pile on a lot faster. I think for the most part, people need to start treating their mobility and flexibility training like they do their strength training. And it should be challenging. Now, I'm not saying just grab 400 pounds of weight and sink into a split and hope for the best, but similar to your normal training. Like if I want to squat 400, do I just load 400 in the bar and keep failing it until I don't fail it? Like, obviously not. There's a progressive way to start loading this, but starting small, and you have to think about it just like strength training. And you need to load those positions, and you start to get more comfortable in those positions, and your body will start to adapt to it, and then it goes from there.
So to gain length in my muscles, I have to actually do strengthening.
Yes, you have to use them.
Wow.
While you lengthen, my friend.
Okay.
It seems like such a stupid and simple concept, but people ignore it a ton. And it's no different. Even for example, like if someone has very, very poor squat mobility, well, a fantastic solution is every single day, I want you to squat down as low as you can with decent mechanics and hold that position. Hold it. Spend a few minutes in that position every single day. And the more you do that, the more you use that range, you'll be shocked at how quickly it opens up. And you're also kind of owning that range. It's not just passive range of motion where you have no control over any of that. And yeah, I can get into the position, but God forbid I'm there. I can't control where the joint is going. And then that's when it starts to become a little bit unsafe. So if you start loading progressively, you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. You're lengthening the muscle, you're basically increasing some of those end ranges, but you're also controlling, and that's the biggest thing. Because you don't want to have just totally loosey-goosey range of motions. Yeah, you might be the bendiest person in the world, but if we don't have any control of that, we're in trouble.
Gotcha. What happens on a cellular level? Like if we want to get granular,
Yeah, I mean, you're going.
Let's try to explain it too for like the layman.
So think about like the contractile unit of the muscle. So the sarcomere. So basically kind of stacked through, and then in between you have actin and myosin. Those cross bridges form whenever you have a contraction. There's basically almost like a little shoe that walks. Boom, it contracts. And the exact opposite when you're doing that eccentric lengthening, basically coming the other way, but it's almost like it's putting the brakes on. And that's the exact reason that eccentric loading, when you're basically ripping and lengthening, causes a lot more damage to the muscle fiber. Not in a bad way, but it is a very large stimulus for growth, which is why when people do eccentrics, they tend to be much more sore than they normally would with a concentric or an isometric contraction. But what's happening is over time, when you're getting that big ripping and that lengthening, you will eventually get the lengthening of that sarcomere. And essentially that muscle, just like anything else, when you're trying to build bigger biceps, you have increase in that size, and you have basically the laying down of new muscle tissue. That's kind of the exact same thing that you're doing when you're strengthening while you're lengthening with some of that flexibility work as well. So it's essentially you're just creating a large enough stimulus on the muscle fibers that essentially lengthens and gets larger and stronger, and you also have that nervous system adaptation as you basically go.
So let's dive into the nervous system. Like, why does the nervous system play a big factor in stretching and mobility?
Honestly, I would say it's more, not necessarily a recent development, but it's one of those things that I think we discounted it a lot more as, probably in the last 10 to 15 years, people are starting to realize how much more important it is. And a good example of that is if it was purely mechanical, let's say when you pull a hamstring, okay, so you have rapid lengthening, over lengthening, and it tears and it rips a little bit. If there was no nervous system involvement at all, in theory, why wouldn't you be more flexible after you pulled that hamstring? Because technically you literally just did over lengthen it, so it was tearing. It's like a rubber band. Like if you tear it more or a rope, it's like it should technically get a little bit longer until that point, theoretically, that it totally snaps. But it's the exact opposite that happens. You get that injury and then boom, the whole thing contracts and gets super, super tight. And the whole nervous system basically locks down. You have inflammatory chemicals that go to the area and it just tightens up. So with that nervous system too, it basically is regulating all of that resting muscle tone for the most part, and it has a huge input into those resting lengths of those muscle fibers. Think of anyone with any sort of nervous system insult or injury. Someone's paralyzed, someone has cerebral palsy, any of those things, you see either zero tone at all, or sometimes the opposite, hypertonicity, spasticity in those muscles. So it's always in a feedback loop of regulating how much muscle tone each one of those muscles has, and there's different organs inside the muscle that are providing feedback to that nervous system the entire time. So if the actual input of it can't be understated of how important it is to essentially govern how much range you're allowed to access. Now, of course, there is a physical component in terms of mechanical stretch, but a lot of time too, there's a reason that contracting and relaxing is so effective of getting length, because it almost is like a quick nervous system reset, and you'll be amazed at how quickly you'll get access to more range. It's the same as when people are under anesthesia, after they had a surgery, like they have crazy improvements in range just because the nervous system is almost, shut down for a little bit, not obviously, but they have way more motion. So that nervous system is governing that tone at a lot of the time.
So if you can't get your nervous system to calm down at all, you're really even getting more flexible.
It's challenging for sure. And that's why even things like deep breathing into a stretch, getting more of a parasympathetic nervous system response. So like inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, kind of getting that vagus nerve stimulation can help with just sinking deeper into a stretch and getting more accustomed to some of those ranges. Because, that's when you see those quick changes in flexibility. It's not that the muscle got longer in 2 minutes. That's impossible. Just cells move slow. That would take months and months to actually increase that true length. But that quick increases from your nervous system, essentially, in the simplest terms, it's like, dude, you're used to that range of motion. Now your body is not like, where the hell are we? We're not used to this. Like, put the brakes on. Like, we're not going past that. As you slowly kind of sink into some of these positions and start loading them gradually, you'll see that quick change. And that's usually from your nervous system kind of just backing off a little bit, kind of just taking the foot off the brake, just a tad. Mm-hmm. That shows how much of an influence it has. So if it was purely mechanical, you should be able to just, boom, rip that thing and you're good to go.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You have these feedback loops, right? Excuse me. If we're going to talk about the nervous system involvement as well, like if I'm a newbie,
yep,
would I want to jump right into the loading the tissue, or would I want to add some other techniques that calm down my nervous system, like the deep breathing or something like that?
Yeah, I would say, if you are to load, I wouldn't go crazy. If anything, it might be more effective if you do like a contraction and a relaxation with some deep breathing at first. So for example, let's say I, want to get into a side split. Okay, so I inch out my feet just a little bit, nothing too crazy. And what I would do is, still focus on my breath, making sure everything is controlled. And then I contract against the stretch. So if here's my split, I contract essentially trying to squeeze my feet together and then hold for around 10 seconds. And then I relax, and it'll allow me to start sinking just a little bit deeper every single time. And that's a fantastic way to start loading, but not going too crazy. And don't underestimate your body weight either. Like, I'm not saying you need to start throwing 100 pounds on your back.
Gotcha.
You have weight yourself. Just loading in that sense is still just as effective.
That makes a lot of sense. What happens now, though, if someone has like a joint restriction? How do you screen out if it's truly joint versus tissue? Because a joint, right, you're going to have a barrier that 100%. Might not necessarily 100%. Be affected at all.
Right. And I would say that, number one, a good PT should be able to help with that 100%. So if anyone's ever unsure of themselves, go to your PT. And they'll tell you. But if you want to do it on your own, I would first check to see if there's any sort of funky end feel. So if, let's say, someone's trying to get into a split, just to make the example easy, in that side split position.
That same position.
Yep. So if I'm going, I don't even feel a stretch on the inside of my leg, in my adductor muscles. And all I'm feeling is pinching in my hip the entire time. And it feels like something's grinding or binding. If, you contract, relax, and you try and sink deeper and deeper, and it's like, if nothing's really happening, man, and it's just irritating it more. It's getting more pinchy, and it's feeling like I'm just hitting an end range or a kind of like a wall. That's something that we need to address, because you're not getting a soft tissue stretch. It's literally just that bone is just kind of like stuck. Now, there are scenarios in which you'll feel more of like a capsular stretch. So it's not pinchy, but it won't feel like a pure muscle stretch. It will feel more like kind of like junky, leathery, like really stiff. But the difference is in the test and retest. If you're noticing improvements, even after you did that stretch once, take a break, go again, it's like, it doesn't pinch as much. Okay, you're on the right track. So you have to always be testing and retesting and seeing those intra and inter-session changes. Because if you're not seeing any changes, we need to do something else. Now, these gains take a while to accumulate and roll over. However, you should see, even if it's a small change, fairly quickly. That doesn't mean it's going to stick like that. Doesn't mean you're going to wake up the next day and magically be, doing splits and everything, but you should see some changes. If you're always just hitting over and over and over, and it's always pinching, and it feels kind of bony, it's time to
check it out.
Yeah.
So what would be your levels of stretch, right? So would you say the nervous system's layer 1?
Sure.
And then like tissue and then capsular?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, 100%.
Why would someone need to stretch their capsules?
So the capsule is huge too, especially recently. There's a lot more data that is kind of indicating how important that capsule is, even something as simple as arthritis.
What is a capsule?
So
let's start there.
Think of it like the leathery sheath that's going to surround the joint. And it's extremely vascular, it has a ton of nervous system input, a ton of proprioception input, which in proprioception is essentially what's telling your brain where your joint position is in space. So I can close my eyes, my elbow's bent. Okay, it's obviously because I just flexed my bicep. But at the same time too, if I didn't know, you'll know where you are in space.
It took you this long to flex your bicep on the video.
What do you mean? So exactly. So that's essentially, that capsule is really important because it's always providing some level of input back to your nervous system. Even in something like arthritis too, a lot of that pain is not necessarily from that cartilage because that's aneural. There's no real information being sent. It's from the inflammation that's spreading to the capsule and irritating everything. And we can see that redness and that heat. So it's extremely important. So with that capsule too, if that leathery sheath is kind of like stiff and not really moving, well, you could do all of the soft tissue work in the world, stretching your hamstrings, for example, but the actual bones need to kind of rotate and slide and glide and move. So it's extremely important to address the capsule just as much. I would say sometimes even more so than just the soft tissue, because the soft tissue is fairly straightforward. Mm-hmm. It's a contractile tissue, it's plenty of vascularity, it's giving you plenty of feedback, but that capsule can be more challenging.
What capsules are the most that you see are affected?
Ton of ankle, ton of shoulder, ton of hip, for the most part. And there's a capsule basically for surrounding most joints, but hip is huge. Same thing with the ankle, because these are extremely weight-bearing joints. So you think about how much force is going through that capsule anytime you take a step. Even something as simple as when you're running, 7 times your body weight on one limb. It takes a lot of work to actually make a change. Now, you can have a PT stretch it and stuff like that, but ultimately having your PT show you how to load it, that's the most bang for you.
So you would still load a capsule.
Yes.
So let's use an ankle example. And I have restrictions with my ankle that moves up, dorsiflexion. Mm-hmm. How are you loading that?
So something like that, number one, let's actually screen to see if there's any bony impingement. So if you're getting a hit every time you go into it, okay, we have to address that sliding and gliding first to make sure that we're not just basically ramming ourselves into a wall. But then from there, if we're feeling a stiffness, not necessarily as much like a soft tissue, Achilles tendon, calf muscle behind, and we're actually just feeling it more on the ankle itself, not necessarily pinchy, but kind of spicy, I would literally just start loading the hell out of it. So take a slant board, take a step, and let's start loading into dorsiflexion, having those plantar flexors, those calf muscles basically slow you down, get that bigger stretch, and then come out of it. So controlling that whole range. And as you're coming down too, trying to pull yourself with those front shin muscles, that anterior tip, pulling into that stretch. So you're going to address the capsule at the same time, for the most part, as you would the soft tissue, give or take, 75% of the time. Now, there's certain positions that we can put you in that don't put a lot of the soft tissue surrounding it on tension, but they'll stretch the capsule. For example, in the hip, if I'm lying prone on my stomach and I'm basically just rotating the hip, kind of in and out, I probably won't feel a large stretch in any muscle. I'll feel it actually just in the joint itself. So that can be something specific that you're really just kind of addressing that capsule. But for the most part, I would just address them both at the same time. Mm-hmm. And think less about specific tissue and think more about the motion that you want.
Okay.
Think about, I just need to let my knee track more over my toes because it's super stiff. I wouldn't stress so much about thinking okay, how's my calcaneus moving? How is, my talus moving? How is my navicular moving? All these things that you can, your PT can help if there's specific restrictions. But for the normal person, I wouldn't even worry as much about that. I would just try and focus on what position do I want to achieve, spend time there.
Okay, let's walk through a full example of someone who wants to touch their toes.
Yep.
How should they go about that process?
Yeah, so I would go as far as we can, the same standing, as far as we can, bend down, keep that back straight so we know it's not coming from spinal flexion, it's just coming from our hamstrings. We're trying to get that hip flexion and find where that restriction is. Okay, contract those hamstrings as much as you can, almost like you're squeezing them, trying to get out of that position, but still hold, don't move, relax, and then just sink more and more and more. And once you start, feeling a little bit of response and your progress starts to slow a little bit, okay, grab a small weight, something 5 pounds, 10 pounds, and the exact same thing. Find that point of restriction, spend time there. And you just keep spending more and more time in that restricted position. And then you start noticing like the lever starts to ratchet in the other direction. And now I can get lower. Maybe before I can only lower that weight to my knees. Now I can lower it to the top part of my shin. Now I can lower it to the top of my ankle. And then before you know it, you're on the floor and you're good to go. It's the simplest thing in the world, but it's not easy. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. It's very straightforward for the most part. But now you actually have to do it and commit to it.
Yeah. So what would be the duration that you would tell someone to do that?
Honestly, until they see change. If anything, I would say minimum some of these holds, like let's say something like that for the hamstring, I would spend 3 to 5 minutes a day on that. But loading it, not 3 to 5 minutes just kind of passively chilling on your hamstring with no weight. Like it should be challenging.
Yeah.
You could be sweating. That's okay. And it's not something you necessarily have to do every day if you're loading it enough. Like if it's a true high stimulus activity, I wouldn't tell you to run a marathon every single day. You need to recover. It's the same sort of thing. Like you're taxing your nervous system, you're taxing those tissues. Give it some time. 3 to 4 times a week, plenty.
Okay. I think that's really well said for someone. Like touching your toes is always a big thing I see with my clients, and it's like, all right, if you could just do this type of modality, add it to your routine, and see what happens. Right. What's your thoughts on yoga?
Love it. It's great.
All types, or?
Yeah, I think honestly, man, everyone has a different taste, I don't want to yuck someone else's yum, but it's good, man. If that's what you like doing, I love it. It's great. If you want to be in that.
That's great. What is the perks of yoga on increasing your flexibility? So
for the most part too, I mean, if anyone, and not all yoga is like this, but even for example, let's say like a Peloton class, like a power yoga class. Dude, people are shaking during those positions. That's not a passive hold. Like you're in, even like a warrior one hold. It's like your legs are shaking, you're sinking deeper, you're trying to support yourself and hold yourself up. You're teaching your body to own that position and to be comfortable in that position. I think it's great. You're going to see huge flexibility increases the entire time. It's the same thing as like, let's say someone spends a lot of time in a handstand. Like, dude, their shoulders are active as they're bouncing. Do you think for a second that they need to stretch their shoulders ever? Like, no. They live in that position. They're so used to going overhead every single time. Can go all the way up. And that's the goal. Like the more you spend in those positions and you tell your body that this is what we need to do and this is kind of the range that we're just living in, you don't need to stretch essentially anymore. But that's a big if. There's the same reason that people who tend to eat on the ground. So certain cultures, there's not a dinner table. It's like, no, it's more of like a small, very, very low table. Ask one of those people to squat and it looks buttery. It looks perfect. Yeah. And you think for a second that they're spending time stretching their calves or stretching their hips? Like, no, man, they just have done that position and squatted down every single day for 40 years. And it's not, they don't even think about it. And that's the truth of it. It's like, as long as you use these ranges, you don't need to spend 4 hours a day stretching them. It's just use it. It's simple use it or lose it equation. And that's all it is.
This eating on the ground analogy, I just started to do that, by the way.
Did you really?
Yeah. We have
It's very paleo of you.
Yeah, I'm getting primal.
Sit in that paleo chair.
I sit on an ottoman.
That's good though.
And it stretches my hip capsule, actually, believe it or not.
Well, think about that. Yeah. So that's a good example of it. If I want to start improving that squat depth, like, okay, get to a low ottoman, try and be active for a second, see if I don't need it, and just hover over it. Okay, good. Then I go down a little bit lower. And then every single time, you're going to have like 50 fucking ottomans in your house, but they're going to just be bump, 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 bump,
Ottomans and squatted potties. What about an heritage and mobility? Like, are there some populations that can't do that because of the way their bony anatomy is?
So that's like a big if. Now,
It's an urban legend.
It's like Sasquatch.
No, he's real.
Yeah, totally. There's the devil. It's one of those things like, yes, everyone does have slightly different bony anatomy. So my squat will not look the same as your squat in certain populations of people. Let's say someone who's of Asian descent versus Indian descent. Sure, hip capsules might look slightly different in terms of femoral anteversion, retroversion, acetabular shape, kind of the angle. Like, Sure, someone's squat will look a little bit different. Limb proportions, femur length, shank length, like 100%. However, everyone should be able to achieve that position. If you look at someone when they're obviously they're first born, like you see a toddler sitting in a squat, it doesn't matter where that child is from, what their background is, what their nationality is, like they can all do it. Now, it might look the same, or it might look a little different, but for the most part, the points of performance should be there. Like you should.
What do you think? What do you think lost it for us?
It's a learned disability, 100%.
Yeah,
it always is. Look at a kid. They can do a split. They're freaking bendy, man. Like they could do anything like that. And there's no reason that as long as you kept using that, and not like crazy, but sit in your squat for a little bit when you're a kid, or like practice a split every once in a while, or actually use these positions, then you won't lose it. It's as simple as you forget how to do it. It's the same as if you sit for a really long period of time, stand up for a second and feel how stiff you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now extrapolate that for 40 years. And you'll see that your body's an efficiency machine, man. Like it's, it doesn't know, like it responds to stimulus. That's as simple as it is. And what sort of stimulus are you giving your body? The yoga sessions are fantastic. 10 minutes a day is an awesome start. But let's think about what am I doing for the other 23 hours of the day, and then multiply that by however many years I've been doing it. And it's easy to see how quickly your body will shed that sort of range. Because there's no reason to keep it. If you're using these ranges, your nervous system is constantly adapted to them, and that's the range that you'll have. But if you're not using it, you're never going to.
Isn't that amazing that our body just adapts to that? It's like crazy. You're not moving, so you don't obviously need that.
See you later. Right?
Yeah.
It's
like, so wild.
If I, trained to squat 500 pounds, do you think for a second, do you know how much energy that takes? Do you know how hard it is in terms of caloric expenditure and energy expenditure that it takes to maintain that level of muscle mass to be able to lift a weight like that? If you stop, you hit 500 and then you never squat again, do you think for a second that 10 years later you're gonna be able to squat 500?
Yeah, no way. No way.
Hell no. So it's like a survival instinct. It's the same reason that people can get away with a whole lot and they'll go around restrictions because your body doesn't know. Like you're just trying to complete the task at hand, and you'll find every which way to do it, whatever it means. Doesn't matter the cost long term, because that's your body's designed to do. That's why people have made it this far. That's how they survive.
Yeah,
but
true.
Now people have more time. Got to go back and think about it a little bit.
Got to get primal. For the newbies, let's summarize the stretching thing. The top 3 things they need to start getting into immediately to start improving their flexibility.
Yeah, number 1, create a plan. That's the first thing. Number 2, stick to that plan. And number 3, stay consistent and make sure that what you're actually doing, testing and retesting it to see if it actually works. So create the plan, do it. Constantly appraise the evidence to make sure that is what I'm doing working, and it's literally as simple as that. You can make the most elaborate stretching routine ever that's perfect and addresses every single joint that you've ever had a problem with, and it doesn't mean shit if you've never done it. So I usually tend to say start simpler than you think and worry more about big movements as opposed to each joint at a time. Like the squat example. Sure, you can individually stretch your ankles, your hips, your knees, make sure your pelvic position is good, or you could just spend time in a squat, and that will solve your problem. Now, of course, you want to get more into it, address the little aches and pains in your squat, more part to you, it's totally fine, but start small and start with movements, and be specific at exactly what you want. Do I want to be able to do a side split? Okay, spend time on your side split, done. Front split, same thing, spend time on your front. If I want to be able to reach my hands overhead, spend time in that position. That's it. Mm-hmm. Don't overanalyze it. Don't, try and over confuse yourself with it.
What's your routine right now?
So every single day. So for me, my ankles suck, my hips suck. So I try and spend more time in positions that emphasize that. So I spend around 2 to 5 minutes every day in a side split, trying to get lower and lower. 2 to 5 minutes in a front split on each leg, and then 2 to 5 minutes in a much wider squat than I would normally do to kind of help open up my hips.
Okay.
Call it like a horse stance,
like
an old kung fu stance, every single day. That doesn't matter if it's a rest day, just spend time in it. Because you design some of these programs too, like we talked about earlier, if you load them a ton, you got to take a little bit of a rest. But these are isometric contractions, so I'm just holding that position as low as I can comfortably until your legs start shaking. But it's not that physically demanding on your musculature, so I can do these every day. And you just build up the tolerance and you just keep going. And I find that when you do something every day, sometimes it's a little bit easier to stick with it, just because it kind of becomes more like your routine. As opposed to like, nope, I only do this on Tuesday. And then God forbid something comes up on a Tuesday, well, shit, I messed my schedule. Nope, simple. You just don't give yourself an out. Just, this is what you're going to do, and then just do it. Like the whole idea of, burn the boats. You're already on the other side, man. Just do it.
100%. Yeah. Make it part of your routine. All right, so we're going to wrap that up. Any closing thoughts there from Dr. John?
The biggest thing, man, just if you want to get flexible, just do it. Just
do
put
it.
yourself in a position that you want to achieve, and that's it. It's not rocket science, truthfully. Just do it, and that's the biggest thing. Nike, don't sue me for saying that. But that's all you got to do, man.
It's true. All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you like this, give us a comment, a share, or a follow. We really want you guys to comment on this. We want to keep growing this podcast, so let us know what you think. Thanks for checking it out.